What's up, players? Welcome back to the Playcast with Jack North. And I'm here today joined by Kether from pickupkorea.com. Kether, would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm Kether, and I've been in Korea for about 10 years, and I also have been coaching for a few years now here. And I think that it would be a really good chance to, exchange insights and different perspectives, since we both are coming from different places probably, and give some value for the listeners out there.
Excellent. So, first of all, welcome. I'm glad that you're here joining us, despite the weird virus situation going on and all that. The first thing I'd like to ask you, though, is how has the virus affected your coaching or your meeting women, things like that?
So I would say initially it was right when it popped off. Actually, if you recall that China was the first place, and then Korea was actually the second big outbreak place, and people were really afraid at the time. I remember some of my friends saying they're going to go back to America, and girls were freaking out, they don't want to go outside. It was really, really impactful for about the first 2 to 3 weeks that it broke out. And then what happened is Korea really got the virus under control. In fact, it's the gold standard now. People are saying that Korea, Taiwan, New Zealand, there's a few countries out there who are the safest countries to be in, and they handled it the best. And literally, a month later, Korea was pretty much fine. Yeah. And it was America and Europe that were that's where the outbreak was really happening. So I would say initially it did impact me for about, the first month or the first 3 weeks maybe. But then once people realized that Korea had it under control and they were doing contact tracing, people are socially compliant enough to wear masks and use a little bit of common sense. After that, then I would say these days, my dating life is as good, if not better than before. So so it was a little, short hiccup, I guess you would say, but thank God for the way that the Korean government handled the virus,
Yeah, and they did. They got it locked down pretty quickly. I still feel like whenever I go out, the crowds, the number of people who are out is just not as much as it was before. And that goes for both men and women, right? But obviously for our sake, we're specifically looking at the number of girls out in a given place on a given evening. So are there any places that you found that are still, if not as good as they were before, maybe almost as good, or are still very fertile grounds, let's say?
Okay. Yeah, so I think that as far as bars and clubs go, I really don't think they're going to be mostly that good for the rest of the year. They have little waves here and there, but I've noticed that Itaewon was okay for a while, and then they had an outbreak about, I don't know, it was a month ago maybe? Yeah. Or a month or two maybe?
2 months ago.
Yeah. And then after that it really, it was pretty good for a while, and then it really died after that. After that last... there was 50 people who caught it from that one outbreak or something like that. But Itaewon was good. Now it's totally dead. I was there about 2 weeks ago, and I don't advise it at all anymore. It's dead for the most part. A lot of the businesses, I think, are going out, and they'll probably be, they'll come back next year, I would say, I would imagine.
Sure.
But Gangnam's still really good. These days, a place called Apgujeong Rodeo, which used to be a dead area, is now revived, and it's flooded with people. Literally, the streets are flooded, the venues are flooded. So that's a pretty good area. I haven't been to Hongdae in a while, but I hear it's pretty decent these days. Is that right?
Yeah. So my usual hunting ground is Hongdae, right? That's where I normally go, and Hongdae is actually still really good, but the places that are good seem to have changed, right? Because where before the virus, Thursday Party was probably the biggest spot where you can go there and you can pull anytime you want, right? Well, they shut down for a month and a half, and they just opened back up, I think, last weekend. And when they opened, I was out there with a couple of guys from the forum, and we were walking by there, and it was dead except for 6 60-year-old ajoshis in there just sitting there getting hammered, right?
Weird.
Yeah, it was super weird, and maybe it was dead because those guys were in there. And anyone who looks in there is nope, not doing that.
Oh, that's funny. I think you make a good point that as far as for nightlife or night game, as some people call it, right? It really has changed a lot. Clubs are definitely closed. Some bars are open, but definitely the spots that people are meeting have changed, right?
Yes.
So Itaewon for now is pretty dead, but now Apgujeong Rodeo or Hongdae is good, But as far as for me, I'm still 80% street game, and mostly day/evening. And so that has not died at all because people are still, it's not like Europe or America where things are in lockdown for months and you can't go outside or go to work and, it's nothing like that. So the streets are just as good as before. The only difference is that people are wearing masks, right?
Right.
So like if you walk around in Gangnam for a couple hours, I mean, it's as full as before. However, you have the mask factor, right? That's a big difference, I guess.
So I'm curious about this. Actually, we had a topic on the forum last week or the week before talking about whether to approach with a mask or without a mask. And I guess everybody has a different idea on this. And I'll tell you mine, but I'd like to hear your thoughts first.
Okay, you're talking about me or the guy who's approaching wearing a mask. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, the guy who's approaching wearing a mask. Should he wear a mask or should he not wear a mask?
Okay, so my opinion is that I'll tell you what I do, and then my rationale is I always have a mask because I need to have a mask because I take the subway and the bus,
Sure.
which Korea, and just to be safe, right?
Yeah.
Like you enter somewhere, a lot of places won't let you in without a mask as well, so for practical purposes. However, what I usually do is I have it on right now.
Yeah.
It's basically I have it
Like
around,
a chin strap.
Yeah, it's like a chin strap, exactly. So it looks like you kind of care. Like, okay, in 1 second, I can pull it up and I have a mask on now.
Yeah.
And then now it's it's off, right? And so I like it like that. I don't like approaching with it on. The reason is because number one, they can't really see you clearly.
Yes.
And number two, if you're speaking in English or even in Korean as a foreigner, it sounds a lot more muffled and they can't even hear you for the most part, right?
Right.
So, I mean, okay, say you're speaking English to somebody whose language, second language is English. Now you have a muffled voice. Now you're just making this whole thing a lot harder, right? And so, I mean, if you're sick, I would advise just not going out and talking to girls.
Right, just don't go out.
Yeah, if you're healthy, I mean, yeah, I would say, I would advise probably like what I'm doing because then, you need to take a bus, you just pull it over your face. And also kind of looks like you, how can I say that? It kind of looks like you care a little bit about the situation, or
you're participating in the social norms.
Somewhat, yeah. You're participating in the social norms, and you care enough to at least have a mask on you, or something along those lines, right? So that's my opinion about it. But yeah.
So my personal take on this is I don't wear a mask whenever I'm talking to people.
Mm-hmm.
Like if I'm approaching a girl, I keep a mask in my pocket, and even the mask is. I know you guys can't see it, but like it's a cat mask, right? And so like if I need to use it, it still works as like part of the game and the attraction parts there. But for me, I feel like most of what I'm doing whenever I'm talking to girls, it's mostly nonverbal, right? Because a lot of my ramble game, right, it's going by quickly, and unless their English is fluent, they're not going to actually understand what I'm saying, but they're going to kind of get it, right? And a lot of that comes from my facial expressions, it comes from my body language, it comes from things like that. And so because this is naturally part of my thing, I'm a very expressive person. I have like a bright face. Like I give them a lot of cues with the way that I move my face, my eyes, my mouth, things like that. And if I put a mask on, I lose 60, maybe 80% of that, right?
Right. So I think that it just stifles your communication in general. Like not only does it muffle your voice like what I was saying, but then also it hides your expressions.
Yeah.
It just sort of blocks a lot of communication in all realms, right?
Yeah.
And that's what I would say. So I would say, I think we both agree then basically have a mask on you, but like, yeah, I wouldn't advise approaching with the mask on. I think you agree, right?
Yeah. And now the exception to that would be there if you approach a girl and you can tell that she's getting a bit skittish about you not wearing a mask, which I haven't experienced in Korea because most, I mean, let's be honest, young people aren't really all that worried about it anyway.
Not anymore.
Yeah, and unless you're approaching old people, right? Which I don't know why you would be, right? But if you run into a situation where
fetish.
Yeah.
Hey.
I'm not here to kink shame. But if you're approaching someone and they seem a bit skittish about you not wearing a mask, be like, "Oh, I totally forgot here," and then pull it out of your pocket or whatever, or off your chin, and then put it on. I still don't think that, I don't know. Like, I feel the same way about the no mask as I do about approaching in English versus Korean. Because at this point now, I've been in Korea for about 11 years. My Korean is good. I can fully converse in Korean, no problem. And I still don't ever approach in Korean.
Okay.
Because the same thing. Like you start running into different obstacles, and it's much easier to fine tune your game when you already know all of the underlying meanings. You know all the obstacles in what you can say, in what you're comfortable with, in your rate of speech, things like that. You know that you're going to get the intonation right. And in Korean, kind of no matter how long you're here, you're never going to be perfect.
Right. And that's a good point.
And so, like, I don't know. I feel like it's stifling your communication by doing it that way. The same way that wearing a mask stifles your communication. Do you ever do approaches in Korean?
I would say that I approach in about 50-50.
Okay.
So sometimes I'll use English on the open, and then sometimes I'll do only Korean, right? Like I mix it up. Generally, I would say what I do is I approach... it's hard to say. It's kind of random, to be honest. But I kind of just go in there with the feeling like... Okay, you know this, right? Sometimes you look at a chick and you think, she probably doesn't speak any English. Like I just have the intuition. So maybe she does, and then it kind of surprises you if she does, right?
Yeah.
But then sometimes you look at a girl and you're like, oh, she seems fluent in English. And it's usually the case, but then sometimes it's not, right?
Yeah.
So I just go in there, I'll often open in English or just whatever my feeling is, right? Maybe in Korean. And then if she responds back in fluent English or pretty decent English, then I'll switch to English.
Yeah.
Or I'll open in English, and if she's just like totally like knowing, like some girls speak like zero English, right?
Yeah.
So then I'll go, oh yeah, 한국말 잘해요. Oh, blah 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 blah, you know, and then I'll flip into Korean, right? So I just kind of play it like fluid, I guess you would say, you know.
That's basically what I do, except without the Korean approaches, right? Like
without opening in Korean.
I never bother opening in Korean. I usually just open in English, and probably 80 to 90% of the time, my opener is something super simple, right? So simple that like, even if they don't understand the words, then they can kind of follow along, right? Like basic level English, right? And then every now and then, but this hasn't happened in a while. But sometimes I used to get girls that would be like, oh, no, English you know, right? Or something like that.
Right.
And then I would jump into Korean and be like, well, that's not an excuse, is it? Let's talk, let's chat, right? Like, let's have a good time.
I totally agree. The other thing is this, like, one benefit of using English on the open is that, like, they already assume that you speak English, and it's sort of expected. They see a foreigner who's speaking in English, right?
Yeah.
And then maybe they'll try to speak a little English, or maybe they're fluent, or maybe they speak nothing. But then when you show after that, like say after 20 or 30 seconds of trying to communicate and it's going nowhere, and then when you flip into Korean, it's almost like a little... It's like the value goes up, like, oh, now he knows Korean, right? And like they didn't expect it.
Yeah.
So it's sort of... It's a nice little segue or a little boost, I guess you would say.
Yeah, it does. It gives you a boost.
It gives you, it's like intriguing, or it boosts their curiosity, or maybe perhaps their attraction in a way too, right? So then, in that regard, it can be better to just open in English and then flip to Korean later, right? Because it's a little, instead, you know what I mean? Like gradually, like ideally your interaction starts and then it gradually gets better, not like it's really good in the beginning and then it goes down, right?
Right.
Does that make sense?
Well, actually, that's usually how I do this, but I let them like walk into the trap, because a lot of times they'll ask me something. They'll be like, "Oh, so where are you from?" And I'll be like, "Oh, actually, I'm Korean. Where are you from?" They're like, "What? I'm Korean too." "Oh, nice. Me too. High five, right?" And then they're like, "Oh, so since you're Korean, you speak Korean, right?" And then I'll just answer them in Korean and be like, "Yeah, of course I speak Korean. I told you I'm Korean, right? Did you forget already?"
Right.
You know, and they just.
Right. It blows their mind.
Yeah, like they're done, right?
Yeah, see, that's the thing. It's like the bar is really low in Korea. Like some countries, they kind of expect you to speak the language. So, like, have you ever been to Japan? In Japan, like not no one, but I mean, 90% of people do not speak any English. It feels like, right? Whereas in Korea, it's like at least 50% of people can speak basic English. I would say at least half of people, right? And so, and then the other thing is a lot of foreigners here, these days it's changing. You have the K-pop wave. You have a lot of people coming from, Europe or America who are like interested in Korean culture.
Sure.
But still, I would say the majority of people don't speak much Korean, if not, not conversational level Korean. So when you can speak conversational Korean, that changes it a lot, because you're it's unique, right? It's like you're probably in the top 10 or 20%. Whereas in Japan, I think if you don't speak Japanese, it's like life is just really hard, because there's not many people to communicate with. And the signs are in Chinese characters,
Exactly.
Hangul, you can literally learn. That's what I tell the guys that, I've coached, or just people in general that I meet in Korea, is that you can learn. I learned Hangul in one day. I mean, it's like learning ABC, whereas If you go to like China or Japan or Taiwan, you're learning everything's a picture per each word that you have to memorize. So we're really lucky in that regard. We have alphabet here, so.
Yeah, Korean is definitely the easiest East Asian language to learn. Like it is at least learning the reading and writing part.
At least the reading and writing, for sure.
So now this is something that I ran into. I was coaching a guy a while back, and he was experimenting with opening in English and opening in Korean, and every time that he tried to open in Korean, the girls would just like run, right? Like they wanted nothing to do with it. But now here's the thing: is that like this guy, he's a good-looking guy. He's like 25 maybe. He's tall. He's handsome. Like he's got everything going for him, and he was opening in Korean. So you would think. You would think on paper, like, hey, this guy should just be getting all the attention, right? But it wasn't happening that way. And I was trying to figure out what it was. And I think what I landed on, and again, this is purely theoretical, I have no idea. But my guess is that because he has a British accent, he comes across like the Indian or Pakistani guys who try to approach in Korean. And it triggers the girls.
Oh, okay.
Right, and so
it's like a weird accent or a weird creepy vibe. Oh, okay.
Even though, like, there's nothing about him that seems creepy, but perhaps just the accent when he spoke Korean, it was just bombing every time.
Right. That's what people don't realize. Like, sometimes when you speak in a different language, you have like it comes off different.
Yeah.
So your voice tone can change in that language.
For sure.
You can come off in a much different way than you come off in your native language. So it is good to get feedback on that, right? Like, I would even say, like, I guess if you're speaking a different language, like Korean, like, you can have girls help you out, like, oh, that voice, sometimes girls say, like, oh, that voice, your voice sounds girly, or it sounds too this or that, right? It's good to get the feedback. That way, you know, you can be more self-aware of how you're coming off, right? And so, yeah. I remember, like, for a while, I was using a lot of, like, aegyo kind of stuff, just because a lot of girls speak in aegyo, right?
Sure.
Like, oh, kurachong, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, oh, this is normal Korean, just because you hang around girls a lot.
Right.
And then what happens is the girls are like, oh, where did you learn this? Like, this is not normal Korean. You talk like a girl, right?
Yeah.
And it's just not, you know, you just kind of naturally pick it up because you're with a lot of girls, right?
I had the same experience my first year here. I lived down in the countryside in Gyeongsangdo, and I learned Korean from all the girls there, right? And then whenever I moved to Seoul, then everybody here was like, why do you sound like a girl from the countryside? This is the weirdest thing ever, right?
Oh, that's funny. That is really funny.
Yeah, and so I had to obviously retool my Korean a lot.
Right. I also used to live in Gyeongsangdo too, like the Daegu, Busan area, and they have like a strong accent too.
Yes.
So that's another thing. Like when you come to Seoul, it sounds kind of aggressive if you speak like that, right?
Yeah.
So then like you can scare girls away just from using that accent sometimes, right? So just being aware of these little things that little linguistic things, you know, for sure, the way you come off, you know.
Now another interesting thing is if you are going to approach a girl in Korean, obviously you cannot just walk up and say 안녕하세요, right? Like that's a terrible idea.
Right.
And so
it's actually kind of funny. I mean, I wouldn't do it, but it just it might work just because it's funny, like as an inside joke to yourself. But it's gonna come off as very weird and uncalibrated, and
if
it's kind of creepy in a way.
If you did it as like as an intentionally like
to like make a joke to yourself, like an inside joke to yourself. Yeah.
Well, and like that obviously comes off to them whenever you're making a joke, but still it might work. But just generally, like that's a terrible idea. Right. So what would you normally use if you're going to approach a girl on the street, let's say?
Okay, cool. If I'm opening in Korean, I usually use a lot of like observational stuff or situational stuff, right? It's because that comes off as the most engaging and natural, right? And so, for example, like say I'm walking on the street right over here, and then I see a girl with like yoga pants on and a yoga mat, and I'm walking on the side of her, or we're at the same stoplight or something like that, right? I might say like, oh, 진짜 yoga 선생님 같네요, right? And it's like, oh, you seem like you're probably like a yoga teacher or something, right? And she's like, oh, 네, 맞아요, da. So that means like, you know what I mean? Because it's just like a natural little segue. Or, oh, you look like you're on the way to yoga class.
Right.
Oh, yoga 수업 하는 것 같네요. Something like that, right? And then that's engaging because it's like, I noticed her and I noticed the situation, and she can kind of respond or not. Or even, I like to comment on the environment too. So it could be like, this is one. I haven't done this recently, but I you know those little fans? Because I sweat a lot as a foreign. Korea's really humid.
The little handheld electric fans?
Yeah, exactly. So sometimes I'll be like at an intersection and I'll say like, oh, 너무 더워요. 이거 하나 사야되겠다. I'll tell them like, because I'll see a girl like kind of, what would you say, like swatty, it's so hot, they're kind of like, like this, right?
Kind of fanning with their hand.
Fanning with their hand, that's what I was trying to say, yeah. And I'll say like, oh, 이거 필요하네요. You know, like a little thing in the situation that kind of matches it, right? And then it's engaging, it's situational, or it shows that I read her or that I made an observation, and then that's instead of just 안녕하세요, you know what I mean? Like popping out of nowhere saying 안녕하세요 can be weird,
like a Jack in the Box.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was thinking actually. Exactly. Like what the hell? Like a clown or something.
Yeah,
for sure. So yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's interesting because that's exactly the kind of stuff that I would recommend for guys opening in English as well.
Yeah, it works in English too. I mean, it doesn't really matter. I would say, you know. Just more of a matters what if you calibrate after, like if obviously she speaks no English, then and if you can speak any Korean anyways, right?
Yeah.
You know, then you can switch into that, you know.
Sure. Well, then let's suppose for just a moment that that we speak very good Korean, right? Have you dated a girl for, I mean, I don't want to say long term, but anything longer than maybe a month, who didn't speak English? And if so, how did it go?
Yeah. I've had relationships with girls who spoke like no English. I've had relationships with them, and my Korean's really good, but that's another thing too though. Like here's another thing, like you never, like you were saying earlier, you don't need to be perfect, because every now and then you can throw in some English expressions, or you know, a lot of guys, they have such a high standard. That's one thing I noticed about, if you're trying to speak Korean with girls or approach them in Korean or have a relationship in Korean, they think you need to be perfect when, you know, you can throw in, if you ever see like a Korean American guy talk, they just throw in random English expressions, right? Because they don't know the word in Korean, and it's cool and it's natural, right? So
Koreans do that too.
Koreans do that too, exactly. So don't be afraid to like throw in English or like have like jampong, like mixed, you know? Yeah. So it can be, you know, I've dated girls and sometimes I'll speak like that too, like a little hybrid language or fusion and stuff like that, you know? But for me, like, yeah, I've dated girls like that. I've dated girls that spoke, you know, like long term even. I've had a girlfriend I had one girl I was dating on and off for 5 years, and she spoke zero English.
Wow.
So, yeah, and that's quite a long time. So
that is a long time. The longest I ever made it with a non-English speaker was like 3 months.
Oh, okay.
And then by the end of that, I was like, look, we both know that this is going nowhere. So like, if the sex is starting to get boring, I mean,
right.
You know, like,
right.
So that one wrapped up fairly quickly. But so here's an interesting one. I actually dated a girl for about a year, and she didn't speak a word of English, but she understood English. And I think that a lot of Korean girls are going to fall more into that category if their speaking is not great, and they're not very comfortable speaking English, but they can understand it pretty well, because that's what they learn in school, right? And so, we used to go out and we would have just like heads turned at us all the time, because we're having literally two languages in the conversation at the same time. Right. She would speak Korean to me, and I would speak English to her.
Right. Exactly. And that's one thing about Korea. Like we were saying, like most people speak or at least understand a degree of English, and so like I was saying, I've seen so many people that just put themselves to like such a high bar when you do really have a default of, you know, if you speak really slow. Here's one thing though. I really advise most students to speak pretty slow, very simple, because there's other guys who they're on the opposite end. They speak really fast and they use like academic terms and stuff like that. I'm like, you almost want to talk down to them. You almost want to talk like you're talking to a second grader or something like that. Right?
So if you're a teacher here, talk to them like you talk to your students.
Yeah, exactly. And they'll be used to, number one, it's accommodating to them, and then number two, they'll be able to understand you instead of like, oh, I got to get out of here because, you know, this is like CNN News talking, right? Like, I don't get any of it. Like here's another thing. My Korean is very fluent. I speak really, really good Korean. However, when I put on the news, I don't understand the majority of it because they're using these like academic, like 사자성어, you know, like the 한문, these really academic terms, and it's basically old school Chinese characters all mixed in, and a lot of vocab that, you know, like scientific, political words that I just never use in daily conversation. So
sure, because why would you, right? Like, why would you know those words?
Right.
So first off, cheers.
Cheers. There we go. Yeah. Got the mekju.
Now, this is probably a question that I imagine a lot of guys who are listening would ask: is how did you learn Korean so well? What did you do to learn Korean?
Okay, so my situation's kind of unique. I went to a language school for a year, and so I was a part of a program where they actually funded my language school and I taught at the same time. It was this kind of like hybrid program thing.
Okay.
And so I got really lucky. That was like right when I got here that I got to actually take Korean classes and work on the side too. And so not everyone's in that situation. So I mean, I would really advise that if you're not in that situation, even if you spend 30 minutes a day studying Korean, because I've had a lot of friends that did that, just dedicate 30 minutes a day to useful vocabulary. Like, write down all the words that you use in English, like when you're having a conversation with a girl or in general, right? In general discussion. The words and the expressions, and figure out how to say those. Like, hammer in a few of those daily, right? And by the end of the year, you're going to have, that's a lot. Like, even if it's only 3 expressions, you can speak 1,000 expressions at the end of a year, right?
Yeah.
And so that's, I mean, I've had friends that speak really good Korean just through, mastering a few words a day, really. And, just hammering them over and over again. So, and the useful stuff, not like, not like obscure, weird stuff that you're never, not like weird stuff you're never going to use in a conversation. Like, really make sure that it's practical, daily sort of conversation, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Now that's interesting. So I had actually learned all of my Korean from basically just talking to girls at bars, right? And dating Korean girls. And like, that was it. That was everything that I learned in Korean, up to a point. And then to get the permanent visa, I took the government classes, right? The
KIP.
Yeah, exactly. So I took the KIP classes, and I recommend them because they're pretty good. They're mostly like day-to-day life. It's not going to help you with like this realm of speaking Korean, but it will help you with learning your grammar points and getting your fluency up, things like that. You're really at the mercy of what professor you get, because I've had some professors that were amazing and had us like speaking every single day, and then I've had other professors that just sat up front and like flashed through the PowerPoint, and they were like, "All right, cool, here you go, get out of here," right? And so it's a toss up on that, but still, like, the program in general is pretty good.
Okay, so that's a good idea for a lot of people, enroll in a program like that, or
the Seoul National program I've heard is also really good because it's so focused on speaking.
Right.
And I've seen a lot of guys who have taken that program, and their Korean is just excellent.
Like, perfect, yeah. There's also these little academies or hagwons these days. There's some in Sinchon and Hongdae. There's one right at Gangnam Station at exit number 11. And what's cool is they have, like, it's very flexible. Like, you can choose what days, what times that match with your work schedule. So even going, to one of those things for like an hour a day, that's a really good investment. Like I said, after a year, it's going to really pay off,
Yeah.
As long as you're getting the practice, you're not just going to class and then walking outside and never using Korean. You need to obviously hammer, reinforce what you're learning in the class, right?
For sure.
So yeah.
The one place that I tried to learn Korean but was absolutely incapable of learning any Korean was at language exchanges. Because as soon as I went there, I went right into game mode.
Yeah.
And by the way, gents, if you have not tried meeting girls at language exchanges, that's basically what it is. It's speed dating. It's speed dating right there. It's a bunch of Korean girls who want to meet foreign dudes and a bunch of foreign dudes who want to meet Korean girls. Like, it's easy mode there. Right?
It's basically like what you said. It's Korean girls wanting to meet foreign guys wanting to meet Korean girls under the guise of language. You know what I mean? Like, I'm saying here with like air quotes, language exchange, right? Yeah. So that's definitely. It reminds me of like a long time ago. I went to in the countryside. They had these places called dabang. I don't know if you remember this. But what it was dabang translates to coffee shop. Like, it's an old word for coffee shop, but it was like coffee shop in air quotes, but it's actually like a sexy girl serving you coffee. Right. And then you can kind of haggle on the side for what kind of sexual services you want, right? Yeah. So that's kind of what it feels like with these, it's like language exchange, but it really is more of like a hookup spot, right?
Yeah, so, it really is.
Yeah.
Well, and it's the same thing for language exchange apps. Like, Hello Talk was very popular for a while, and now MEEP.
MEEP is big right now.
Yeah, MEEP is big. And actually, for those of you listening, we have a MEEP tool in the forum. So for guys who join in the forum, you can actually use the MEEP tool that really speeds up your MEEP process, and there are no ads or anything like that. So it it makes it so much easier to just sift through, right? Like
okay.
it auto filters out anybody without a picture. Like it auto dislikes them.
So it's like a little app or something, or a program?
Yeah, it's a web program where like you log into your MEEP account on the site, and then you can set your location to wherever you want. So you can set it to like where your computer is or where your phone is or anything, or you can set it to like I want to be in Hongdae. Now.
Okay.
And then you can match with like all the girls in Hongdae, or I want to be in Gangnam and match with the girls in Gangnam, or whatever.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah,
okay.
and then it obviously, like I said, it dislikes the ones without photos.
Right.
And it lets you quickly sift through without any ads or anything like that. So
definitely a lot of girls on MEEP are definitely pre-screened or predetermined to like foreigners or be interested in dating foreigners. So it is a good little tool, especially. I think especially if you're like just starting out too.
Yeah.
Like you need to get a little bit of the reps in. You need to like learn how to run dates, learn how to text a little bit, get girls out, and make it a little bit easier on yourself in the beginning. I think
Yeah.
So yeah, it's definitely good. I agree.
I wouldn't recommend relying exclusively on any sort of apps or online things. Like street game is always going to be your best bet. Street and just in person, right? Like even bar, venue, anything in person is always going to be better.
Right, totally agree.
But I actually met Lady North on MEEP as well.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, exactly. I mean, you can still a lot of the hot girls on the street are on an app as well. So
for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it might just take more filtering or harder to match sometimes. But yeah. I think it's good to draw from all the lead sources, right? Like bars, clubs. I mean, I view people view like game and life are different. I view it as like one organic, holistic process.
Oh,
like,
completely.
You have game on your phone. You have game when you walk. As soon as I walk out the door, game starts. As soon as I'm on the subway.
But even in here, like we're sitting in my living room and we're talking, and like even the way that we're talking, like this is still informed by the lessons that we've learned through this stuff. You go in for a job interview, that is game, my friend. That is 100% game.
Exactly. So I mean, draw from all lead sources, right?
Yeah,
that's
for
what
sure.
I would say. Yeah.
Anything that can help you get to learn more about yourself and about how to deal with other people and about what kind of things people respond to well, right? Because anything that you come up with an idea, you throw it out there, and then you have to see, because maybe you'll get good feedback, maybe you'll get bad feedback, but either way, you still have to throw it out there, take the feedback and take it humbly, and then adjust as needed.
Exactly. I mean, the thing about if you're only relying on online games, though, there's definitely some bad sides, which are that you're not able to, like in real life game, when approaching in real life, you're able to see like what's going wrong, and you can actually troubleshoot a lot of what's going wrong. It could be your voice, your voice tone's off, or your eye contact, or all these different factors, your calibration. Whereas online, none of that really exists. Like the girl will come out, but you might even ruin that because you haven't really sharpened the blade, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
So that's why I think like a lot of people these days, I feel like they're getting lazy, where they're like, I'm only going to do online game and I'm only going to do this, but which can be okay if you already have good social skills and good pictures and you're decent looking or whatever, that can work out. But like
it's still complacency.
It's still complacency. Yeah, for most people, you still need to sharpen the blade and get out there and stuff. So
yeah.
I mean, that's my opinion on it. Yeah.
Okay, now I'm gonna hit you with a nice fun one as we wrap up this podcast. Your worst coaching session. Tell us about your worst coaching session.
Okay, let me think about that one. Worst coaching session. Okay. A long time ago. It was one of the earlier ones. I had this student, and he would question literally everything that I was telling him to do, right? Or he thought that he had like a better... Okay, so I'd tell him like, oh yeah, go approach that girl. Okay, you can use this line if you want, or say whatever you want, yada, 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 whatever. I would give him some advice, right? And he would say, well, I don't think that's going to work out, or why would I say that? And stuff like this, right? And I asked him like, all right, what kind of results are you getting? Nothing. then and who are you paying?
Yeah.
And you should probably follow through with the advice, right?
Yeah.
So it's like going to a personal trainer and they're like, okay, so we're going to do bench today.
Yeah.
We're going to do whatever, 50 kilograms, 10 reps. Why would I do...
No, Kether, I don't do bench.
Right. Yeah, it's like saying that, like, oh, what is that going to do? Why would that... Okay, are you in shape? No. Then maybe you should follow the advice that you paid somebody to give you, right?
Right.
So I think the worst kind of students, or the worst, I mean, in general, even that people are going to try to learn a skill, it's that I notice there's different kinds of people, right? So there are people who they get advice or they try to learn something and they try it once, or they don't even actually really try it, or they might try it once. It's this half-ass attempt, like, oh, I tried that, it didn't work. And so, oh, this doesn't work, I'm going to give up, or they think they have a better idea. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's like people, you really need to, I mean, in life in general, not just game, right? You really need to like try something out thoroughly to see if it works or not, right?
Absolutely.
And so, yeah. I mean, that's another thing too, is like some, it's like Tim Ferriss kind of advice. Is like you find who's doing better than you at something, and then you can kind of copy them or mimic them, and then kind of make it your own, right? You know, everyone has a different personality and stuff, right?
Sure.
And so, I mean, that's good advice in general for most things. So yeah, if you have the chance to do coaching or, you know, meet somebody who's doing well in Korea or with girls that you like, then that's probably a good, you don't need to always question them, or like, if you're getting better results than them, why are you going to listen to their advice, right? So,
Right.
So, yeah, definitely, that was probably my worst one, is where the guy, like, it was basically like pulling teeth for 6 hours or something like that. Like, oh God, you know, like, why did you even pay me for this? You know, I guess you have all the answers yourself, right? You know, so.
I feel like you're reaching into my brain, because that's also my worst coaching session,
Really?
right? Like,
Yeah.
it's almost to the T exact, except mine was over a whole weekend, right?
God,
And so
frustrating, huh?
oh man, yeah, it was a tough one. But in any case, I think that the biggest thing there is that you have to be willing to fail, and then be self-aware enough to take that feedback of failure and say, okay, now what can I change to turn this into success?
Yes,
Right?
yes.
Because there's, I mean, very little in the world that is just never going to succeed at all. Like, even earlier, whenever I said that, oh, I'm gonna fail! Like, even that, we were sitting here in our minds, we were like, well, you could make that work if you did this and this and this. You'd have to obviously tool it to some different things. But what my point, though, is that anything that you're doing, any kind of line, any kind of approach, any kind of routine, it can all be successful if you're self-aware enough to know, okay, here's what I can do, here's what fits me, my style, my game, and here's how I should change this to make it actually work.
Right.
Sure, maybe it failed the last 5 times, but I mean, in all seriousness, like, okay, it failed, but it failed less each progressive time, right?
Exactly.
Like, the first time, maybe she just immediately, you know, like, insta-nexts you, right? And then maybe the last time she's like, that's interesting, so why are you doing that, right? And then, like, it's still a failure, but it's less of a failure, so maybe you can keep going with it. And I think that's it takes a lot of actual willpower, like a lot of
for sure.
inner strength to accept, okay, I'm gonna fail a ton, and then I'm gonna get better.
Exactly. A lot of guys, they're trying to avoid the feeling, like, they're trying to avoid discomfort is what it is, right? It's like, this isn't everything though, right? It's like, I don't want to go to the gym, it's not comfortable, or I don't want to eat healthy, it's uncomfortable, right? So especially with this area, because it can really, with certain guys that have maybe a big ego, or they really take what other people say or how they react to heart, right? So they just really want to do anything to avoid that, right? And so you really have to go through the grinder. You got to go through the grinder.
I ate a piece of broccoli and I'm still fat, clearly. Right?
Hey, it's the little things that help though, right? Like broccoli, broccoli instead of chips. I mean, that's big,
Right.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, yeah, I think we have similar experiences with the coaching side of that.
It certainly sounds so.
Yeah.
In any case, Kether, it has been absolutely fantastic talking to you, my friend. And players, I'm glad that you stayed with us and listened throughout. So you guys have a good time, and I'll catch you next time. Players out.